It's equal parts encouraging and frustrating, but when I don't really know what my next move is, I tend to reach out to somebody else who does the same thing as me, but seems to be doing a lot better, and I ask them. And inevitably, they have the same number of questions for me that I have for them. And we go back and forth, and they're like, but how are you doing this? And I'm saying, no, you're the successful one. I have questions for you. Don't ask me. I don't know, So it's, on the one hand, it's like, I didn't learn as much as I'd hoped. But on the other hand, the person who looks like they're doing better has all the same problems as you.
Today's conversation is with one Mr. Jeff Garriock. Now, Jeff is a Toronto-based director and cinematographer, or as I like to call him, the real-life Dos Equis man. He focuses on natural history and science-based projects, specializing in underwater work because of his passion for the ocean. Jeff has worked in making films in professional sport with National Geographic and in over 70 countries around the world. I mean, he has shot everywhere from inside the Chernobyl nuclear power plant to the Antarctic Peninsula to working with Giants of Africa and Masai Ujiri and the incredible work that they do, to working with whale sharks in Galapagos with a man named Jonathan Green, who was one of the featured stars in BBC's Blue Planet 2. Jeff is Dos Equis. Increasingly attracted to conservation stories, Jeff hopes to shine a light on situations that need our attention, even those that may seem quite far away from our regular lives. This is less of a methodical how-to and more of a conversation with Jeff about his journey, lessons learned along the way. So broadly, it is how to be a natural history cinematographer. We talk about how he got his start, how each stage of his career evolved. What are the most important elements of booking a job as a creative? How do you resolve conflict, which inevitably will occur when you're working in high-stress environments on set with a team? How do you tell a good story? And that goes for anybody, whether or not you're a creative or you're someone who's just looking to tell a good story at a dinner table. What makes a decent, a bad, or a great story? How do you do it in less than 30 seconds? Commercial. Sorry about that. And one last quick caveat about this conversation. There were about 3 small technical errors that occurred in the first 5 minutes, but from there, it's smooth sailing. So if you hear something funky, that's what's going on. We've tried to fix it on the back end. We've done as best we can, but you may notice it. But it does not happen the entire episode, I promise. Let's get into it. This is How to Be a Natural History Cinematographer with Jeff Garriock. What's official title that you like to be called, though? Is it nature cinematographer?
Cinematographer. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Great.
Mm-hmm.
We are here today. I like how that suddenly got to like a morning show. So, like not even actually.
We're here today.
It was like the midnight hour. Like, hey, welcome. We got smooth jazz.
Or the beginning of a meditation podcast.
Yeah. Well, wow.
Well, we are here today to clear our minds.
Dive deep. I did see that you were on a recent podcast talking about this. It's also about working with good people, and that's such a predominant part of the creative industry. It's not necessarily your individual skill set. Of course, that matters because you have to show up and do the job, but it's who you are as a person.
Yeah, the way I said it to James just recently was I would much rather work with the 4th or 5th best person if they're going to be nice than the best person if they're going to be a dick. Because if you're going to put in 14-hour days with somebody, especially on a natural history type shoot where often you're living in really difficult conditions, you're in a tent on the Greenland ice sheet, or you're on a boat where the room is only big enough for one of you to stand up at any given time, you want to get along with that person, and it's a much better experience for you and for the end product if you get along. Because if you're sitting there and you're clashing at every moment with somebody who's very difficult to be around, the work is going to suffer. Even if, you having bad times to one side, the work is going to suffer. And if you go there, have a terrible time, and produce something you aren't proud of, then what's the point? So I'm a big believer in working with people that you like. I think everything is raised by you being in a good mood most of the time.
What's your advice for people on set, whether it's actually set or in your case also in nature and in the wild? It's not really a production set, but you're live in the moment. That was a terrible way of phrasing that question. That was a nice little run.
Live in the moment?
Live in the moment. Wow.
I'm live in the moment right now.
Remind me to have more coffee. No, but when you are working with a crew and with a team, of course, there's just being nice and being a good baseline human. But say some conflict starts to bubble up of just personality differences. What do you notice makes the biggest difference when you're working on those teams beyond just the baseline, be a good human?
Talk about it and talk to the person in question about it. Because what inevitably happens is, issue so-and-so. You go back to your room or you go, to have coffee in the corner and you bitch about it to somebody else. You're like, oh man, are you having a problem with so-and-so? I'm having a problem with so-and-so. And then you're like, yeah, I am. Oh, they did this and they did this. And it's like, oh, well, for me, they did this. And then everyone's just getting all the rage out. And then you go back to the set and then the person's there again. And instead of having resolved the problem, you've doubled down because you're like, not only did they do the thing I didn't like, but they did the thing that they didn't like. And now both of us are mad. And you look at the other person you've conspired with and you're like, yeah, screw them. And that's not helping. So it's go to the person and be like, hey, you spoke to me in this particular way and I wasn't super thrilled. I don't mean to get on your bad side. I don't want to do anything that's going to disrupt us. I want this to get along because we're going to be doing this for 3 more days. But just so you know, wasn't super happy with that. But if you want me to get this done, please don't hesitate to ask me. Just ask me in this way. Or just like go to the person and deal with it. Like, this is how we're going to solve this. We're going to talk about this and we're going to work through this.
Would you also say that checking your ego is a huge part of it?
I have very little ego to begin with.
I mean, not you in particular, but generally.
I don't know. I mean, I think that's good advice all the time. Like, I feel like ego is generally more tangled up in individual. No, I don't want to say that. I think checking your ego is always a good piece of advice. I can't think of a situation where having quite a lot of ego is going to be the thing that makes a positive impact. Maybe if you're fighting with a giant monolithic studio about getting your vision across, but even then, usually it's because you're fighting for the efforts of an enormous team who's tried to make something very difficult with very little money over very difficult conditions. So I think it's always good to check your ego.
Yeah, and I think there's always a chance that people's ego is in their blind spot.
How do you mean?
People may not recognize when ego is playing a part and the importance of self-awareness, being open to criticism when someone approaches you about something you might have done, is to not let your ego get in the way to receive that. Where it's not necessarily, because I hear you on the ego is never going to get the job done.
Right.
Rarely. I shouldn't say never.
Yeah, not never.
But to make sure we're all aware of our own blind spots when it comes to ego, of the way I want to get it done, what my position is in this role and job, like the way you could have approached those 2 models is, nope, this is the way it's going to be, my way or the highway, but to approach it in a very diplomatic manner while still enforcing the scenario in the case and just painting a picture. Like, that's a non-egotistical way of approaching it versus someone may say, I have this title, too bad, my way or the highway.
Yeah, I just can't imagine a situation where that makes it better.
It's common.
Yeah, no.
I agree.
But this is what I mean about why it's always, because if I could have stormed in there and been like, I'm the director and this is my ship and you've agreed to this and screw you all and you're going to sit down, shut up and act your faces off. I just don't. Then everybody's upset. I'm angry. That's
exactly how we should do it.
Maybe in I don't know, like a 1950s black and white film. I'm the director here, and you'll all sit down and shut up. We'll get this film on the road.
So I want to wind it back because we did kind of like get straight into the weeds. How did you end up where you are today?
That's a very big question.
Yeah, I know. Are you ready for 5 hours of a conversation? But generally, where did filmmaking first come into play for you, and why specifically cinematography is the choice within this industry?
Okay, like that's more, I can deal with that a bit better. Filmmaking was sort of just a recreational thing in high school. So we had a friend named John Hooper, whose parents had a video camera, and myself and Kirk, who is a filmmaker, and we still work together to this day and are still good friends to this day. The 2 of us and John Hooper would basically have like a sleepover at John's house, and we would make stupid films with his parents' camera. And I'm talking about like very stupid things about vampires and hobos who saved the earth and that sort of thing. And it was great fun, but it was the sort of thing where like, I'd never thought of that before. I'd never had the means before. And then we got into this and I was like, oh, this is really great, actually. What a wonderful and exciting thing. And then I think it was probably either the same year or the following year where we had a class called Media Arts. And we basically were like, it was like making a film as part of this class. And we were doing that already for fun. And it was kind of the first time anybody had said to me that this could be your job. And I had always thought it was just a fun hobby or something you would do on the side or that sort of thing. I was shocked because a job, when you're in high school, you have no idea what a job is actually like. And the job that I have now didn't exist then. So it was the sort of thing where, yeah, it opened my eyes to the fact that spending your time working on these things and learning how to do these things might actually be really valuable in the future. Like that's something that could get you work and get you paid, and you could do that all the time. So that was really exciting. Tell me the second part of your question again.
Why cinematography specifically?
That came later on because I was very much the editor in those early days because I was the one who had the computer that could actually do the stuff, and I was the only one who figured out because we were shooting tapes then. It was like not HD cam. What was it? DVC Pro HD. I don't remember. It doesn't matter. A format that doesn't exist anymore. No, it was mini DV. I'm sorry. That's what it was. So we would shoot on these mini DV tapes with this very bizarre half digital tape. But at the end of the day, it's a tape that you have to put in a thing and play back. So you'd have to capture footage in real time. So you plug the camera into the computer and then you press record on the computer and then you play the tape. And so if it didn't work or it skipped or it broke or you wiggled the cord a little bit, you'd have to start again. And nobody else had the patience for this except for me. So I was the one who kind of figured out how to do this and then figured out how to use it was Adobe Premiere at the time. I think it was Premiere 3.0.
Holy Hannah.
And learning how to do this type of stuff. And so I was like, editing is so interesting because we didn't always know what we were doing when we were making a film. We were just doing stuff that we thought was silly or fun. And I was like, if you play this clip backwards, it can make it look like this person's doing this instead of doing this. And so just like learning how stuff worked. And I did really enjoy that. But when I got into the real world, I realized, especially my first proper job was working at Maple Leaf Sports and Entertainment, where they're the parent company of Leafs, Raptors, Toronto FC, as you know well. The fun stuff was being with the camera, doing the interesting thing, because then you're out with a person who's a professional athlete, or you're out in the community somewhere, or you're at some giant event, or you're at some contest, or you're at a game and doing all kinds of fun stuff. And the editing is you by yourself in a dark room for hours and hours and hours. And as much as it's great to be building a story and creating something from end to end, especially in that context where most of the time you're either creating a sports-based story, which is always puck goes into the net and the home team wins in some fashion or another, or it's an ad where the story is buy this product and have a better life. So it's not as exciting as it is when you're making a short film or making a documentary and you're like, learn about this incredible endeavor by this person, or like feel for this difficult relationship where people are trying to overcome something. It's the same story. So I think that also played a big role in disillusioning me from editing, because I wanted to be out doing the cool thing in the cool place. That was way more interesting to me. Like, I want to meet the strange athlete and I want to talk to people and I want to do all that sort of thing. So the reason I ended up doing cinematography was because I wanted to spend my day in the interesting place doing the interesting thing.
MLSE, you have this realization, I want to be in the action. I want to be with individuals and a part of the story as it's happening. What happened next?
So I had a wonderful series of coincidences where I went to the movies and I saw an ad at the beginning of the movie that would just looked like a cool travel thing. And I didn't really understand what it was. Just a lot of cool experiences jammed together like all over the world for a company called G Adventures. And then the following day, by just unbelievable coincidence, I got their brochure through the door of the house. And I was like, well, that's weird. And so I had a look and I was like, oh, it's a travel company. Okay, I wonder if they're hiring. And they were hiring for a filmmaker, editor to go and travel the world and do that sort of thing. And I was like, well, this is like the job of my dreams. I can't believe they're hiring. And sure enough, like after, a couple of interviews, I beat out 3,000 people and I got hired, which was unbelievable. And I still do work for them. I'm going to do some work for them 2 weeks from now, which is wonderful because they're a really great, tight-knit group. And it's a lot of the same people who are still there from the time that I was there. And yeah, I still really dig the ethos of the company and that sort of thing. But I went over there, and on my third day of work, we went to Indonesia. And it was sort of that from then on. And like 4 or 5 times a year, we were off into the world shooting travel promos, which was amazing.
What set you apart? What do you think with 3,000 people?
I don't know. I know my boss has told me that one of the things was that I could shoot underwater. And I had that in the reel because my great dream was always to shoot underwater. And I had done one thing for a friend who started a dive company in Iceland. And it was when I was still trying to get going. And he was like, hey, you should come and shoot a video for us for this dive company. And I was like, that sounds like the greatest thing ever. He's like, we don't have any money, But if you can come to Iceland, you can stay with me and you can dive as much as you like. And I was like, well, that's a pretty good deal. So I went and we did this like promo. I'm thinking this will be like a showpiece that'll help, get me in the door in the next step. And it sounds like it probably did help. So I had shot some travel stuff, just traveling on my own. Like I drove across Canada and I shot a bunch of stuff, and I went to Japan on my own and shot a bunch of stuff, just being like, this is what I would love to be doing. So I had something to show, and everything that I had to show was something that I had just done on my own, which when I was showing it felt like it was a weakness, because I was thinking, oh, well, I haven't even done any actual work. This is all stuff I've just done for fun. But looking back now, I feel like it's probably a strength, because it was more like, oh, even for fun, he wants to be doing this. You know what I mean? So that's one of the things. And other than that, I don't know. I think I just got lucky, because 3,000 people is a lot of people. And I look back at some of the stuff I was doing then, and I'm like, oh, I wasn't that good. You know what I mean? I'm also my own worst critic. But yeah, I think I just lucked into it.
Right. Like this wasn't a story of you saying, well, I found the name of this person and I made sure I reached out to them, get coffee. Like it was the reel that made you stand out. And
I hope so. I think I interviewed okay as well. But I mean, I don't know. I really don't know. I think it was just like, the right thing at the right time.
I love that advice though, because it is true. Like when you are getting started, especially if you're in any type of creative field, you kind of have to show in order to tell. Like you have to have the work done. You hear it over and over and over. Pick up the camera, stop just studying what to do. I'm my own hypocrite in this department too, where there's so much we just want to add, and we sometimes wait for the moment and permission to be like, oh, I have this opportunity, especially paid. And how often, where do you find that balance? I'd say this is a two-parter. One, at the beginning of your career, in free work for the experience and paid, knowing your worth, and then to where you are now.
I mean, I'm still doing some work for free every now and then, which is, not something I thought I'd be saying at 36, but it is what it is. But the way I always describe it to people is there is a spectrum like this. And especially when you work for yourself, on the one end of the spectrum is the greatest job in the world. It's exactly the thing you want to be doing. You love every second of it, and there's no money. And on the other end of the spectrum is the most soul-crushing corporate bullshit that you don't care about, and neither does the person asking you to do it. It just needs to be done, and there's tons of money. And the goal is that you want to be here in the middle with the best of both ends. But that's not always possible. So what I usually try to do is just enough of the corporate stuff so that I can keep the lights on when I'm doing the joyful, wonderful, exciting stuff. So, of course, the dream is eventually I want to be right in the middle where it's exactly what I want and it pays the bills. And like more and more, I'm finding that's the case. There are jobs where I'm like, this is amazing. And it's lucrative enough that I'm, like the mortgage is paid and the equipment is paid down and that sort of thing. But sometimes it's not. And so you pick up a couple of jobs that you maybe not are thrilled with necessarily, so that when the right opportunity comes along and they're like, we don't have the budget we'd hoped for, but it's exactly what you want, you can say yes with confidence.
I love that you kind of have, from an outsider's perspective, you found a really cool balance though in the stories that you tell now. And I think about some of the clients and the work that you do, and I'm intentionally not saying which clients and what work because I'm curious which one you give first as an example, that it is that blend of storytelling meets travel, but it's still sponsored in a way that everyone is getting paid.
Yeah, I mean, the best example is probably the one you're thinking of is Rolex.
That's exactly what I'm thinking of, yeah.
But I started working with them in 2016, and I still work with them once or twice a year, and which is amazing. And now they've got a partnership with Mission Blue, which is Sylvia Earle's organization, and they do amazing amplification of voices in the ocean conservation community. And so that's really brilliant because Rolex is all about giving grants to scientists, adventurers, explorers, etc. And they have the money, they have the resources to do it, but they are also really great at putting the stories first. I've done some sponsored content where it's so blatant, where the person is being asked to turn and explain in the interview, isn't it so great that sponsor X is here doing this? We sure couldn't do this without sponsor X. And Rolex is a lot more subtle. We put the logo at the end, and the person in the film wears the watch. And other than that, it's entirely about the science or about the adventure or about the exploration or about the thing that the person is trying to change, which is amazing. And some of the work that I've been lucky to do with them has been brilliant. Like this year we were in Colombia in a place called Malpelo working on a project through Mission Blue with Sandra Bisuto, who is like a ocean warrior and has gotten Malpelo. Malpelo, by the way, is like sort of the Galapagos of Colombia. It's like a teeny tiny island in the middle of nowhere, 30 hours sailing out of mainland Colombia, with a ton of endemic species and a really unique reef, and it's protected because of her. She argued for it. She got a marine protected area created, and now she's expanded the size of that marine protected area by working with the Colombian government over a period of 30 years. And so that was really amazing. And so we get to make stories about her, and we go to Malpelo and we dive and deal with admittedly very difficult conditions, but yeah, and it's the best. And like, you know, you make enough money to like live a good life. You're amplifying the voice of an important ocean conservationist, and the sponsor gets to feel good about being a part of really interesting and valuable work.
What type of work do you seek to pursue now?
So 2 years ago, and I don't know how much I can talk about this, I did one job with National Geographic. I can't say any more than that because I signed a terrifying NDA with Disney. But that will...
Mickey's going to come back.
Yeah, so... I can only say that I did that, but that was like always the goal. I wanted to either work with the BBC Natural History Unit or with National Geographic or both. And that is just like the majority of the stuff that they do is straight up natural history stories, like a Planet Earth sort of thing, where it's like, here is the animal and here's the behavior and here's the thing. And that's the dream, because that exists only to talk about that. And it's amazing. And like, people have varying opinions on how hard it is, on how well it's paid, on how all kinds of different sorts of things. But that's the dream, is to be doing that. And I got one little taste of that last year for the first time. And it was amazing. It was like sort of one of those odd COVID benefits where they weren't able to get the people that they needed over here on a Canadian visa. And they needed somebody who did have one and was more or less local. And that was me. And it was an amazing experience. And I was really, really thrilled. And so the goal is to be doing that.
How do you get your name known for projects like that? Like that's where it's, of course, your work can speak for itself, but sometimes there's still the business and the marketing side of marketing your own work, networking, dare I use that word, but how do you approach that?
I mean, ask me again in a year. I'm kind of in the middle of few plans where I'm trying to figure this out because nobody seems to know. I think it's equal parts encouraging and frustrating, but when I don't really know what my next move is, I tend to reach out to somebody else who does the same thing as me, but seems to be doing a lot better, and I ask them. And inevitably, they have the same number of questions for me that I have for them. And we go back and forth, and they're like, but how are you doing this? And I'm saying, no, you're the successful one. I have questions for you. Don't ask me. I don't know, you know? So it's, on the one hand, it's like, I didn't learn as much as I'd hoped. But on the other hand, the person who looks like they're doing better has all the same problems as you. So I don't really know if that's any help. But I think, again, it's like, keep doing what you're doing. Do as much of the type of thing you want to be doing outside of the purview of a paid job. And just go ask. That's the other thing. Don't expect to be discovered. That's a terrible strategy. You can put something up and hope for the best, and you never know. Like, every now and then, it can happen. I have had an experience where, apropos of nothing, someone reached out to me and I ended up giving a speech in Dubai, and it was amazing. But that's one time, and that is not the normal experience.
Right.
So like, that was just incredible, unbelievable luck. And even when it happened, when I first read the message, I was like, this is definitely a scam. Because it reads like a scam. You're like, we would love to exhibit your photography in Dubai at our photography festival. Why don't you please come and join us there? We'll all expenses paid trip. And I was like, yeah, sure.
When are you asking for my SIN number?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, let me just send you all my personal information. And then I looked the guy up and I was like, oh no, he's the curator of the largest festival in the Middle East and has been for several years. And I got him on the phone and I couldn't believe it. But so like, it can happen, but that is... To quote a very ridiculous banking commercial, hope is not a plan.
I have 1,000 questions alone separately about that. It makes sense for a banking commercial now that we're saying it out loud.
I think it was like an investment thing. I can't remember exactly, but it aired during hockey games, so I saw it about 600 times over the hockey season last year.
We invest in our GIC today.
It was so intense. You know what I mean? Like, all the other commercials are like, oh, have fun at the big game and eat this product or do this thing. And then there was this like, two dudes talking about finance, and the guy's like, hope is not a plan. And then it ends, and there's no music. It was very doom and gloom, and I was just like, "Oh my god!"
You're in the middle of the game, like, I just want to see if the Leafs are going to win.
Right? Like, this is meant to be my escapism. Don't remind me about the peril of my finances. Come on, man! Like, it was very intense. I wasn't happy, but it did stick with me. So I guess it's made an impact.
I feel like the same art director, whoever ran that commercial, just like, okay, the subsequent commercial for this season should just be Samuel L. Jackson looking at you deadpan down the barrel, going, "Get your shit together." It's a 5-second commercial. It's great.
That would be amazing.
It's kind of funny because when we first were talking about doing this podcast, of course, like, you're one of my best friends. It's where do we even begin? And how do you talk about? And it's really about your journey. And one of the other areas, though, that this is applicable for people outside of careers in creative is there's such a focus in marketing for many businesses on video and the art of telling the visual story. Not to distill this down to a simplified question, since this is another episode on its own, it could be a story at a dinner table or it could be a story for marketing. What are the basics and the bare bones that people should know and are often overlooked?
Yeah, I can certainly give you a few of those, and I try and teach this. I'm the photographer in residence on an expedition ship some of the time, and I basically get a 45-minute.
Where's that ship?
In Antarctica.
Nice.
But I do like a 45-minute lecture at the beginning, and so I don't have a lot of time, and I'm communicating to a lot of people who aren't necessarily there to do a photography course. You know, some of them certainly are super keen, but some of them are there more or less to be on vacation, and then there are folks in between who are like, "I'll get a slightly better photo." So it's like, how much storytelling can you teach in 45 minutes to people who are only a little bit interested? A few things I can say are have a beginning, middle, and an end. I know that sounds so route one, but how many times have you been at a dinner table and someone's been like, "Oh my God, well, we went to the pub and then so-and-so was up on the table and they went, rah, blah, blah, blah," and you had to be there. And they just bail out and there's no ending at all to speak of. So like having a beginning, a middle, and an end, really important. Like that's a story with two of those things and not a third. So that sounds so stupid, but like when you go to show something, does it have those things? Number two, less is almost always more. If you can show something, don't tell it. You know what I mean? Like if you want to show, like if somebody is late, the easiest thing in the world is to have the person go, "Oh no, I'm late." And that's just also very like route one storytelling. There's 6 million ways to show that that person's late. Maybe they forget something as they're halfway out the door. Maybe it's just as simple as they're glancing at their watch. You know, maybe it's something where they're trying to manage too many things at once. No one is going to make a mistake about what you mean. Like everyone's been late for something, you know, like that's a universal experience. So there are a million universal ways to explain that experience. So like show, don't tell, less is more. And the other thing I think is if you only have 30 seconds to tell a story, tell me one story. Don't try and explain 15 things to me, because this is something I run into with brands a lot of the time, where it's like, okay, well, our demographic is age 0 to 99, located in the world, and we would like all of them to know who we are, how long we've been doing this, why we're better than our competitors, what our product is, what's so revolutionary about our product, why our product is superior to the next best product, why it's going to help them in their lives. And I'm running out of fingers and to count this on, and I can't explain. It's like, no. Tell me one thing. Is this about you? Or is it about the product? Okay, it's about you. Okay, what's the one thing you want people to know about you? Are you better? Are you faster? Are you cheaper? Are you easier? Like, what's the thing? Okay, you're easier. You're the financial institution that's the easiest. We're going to tell a story that's just about that, you know? And like, think of how long you give your attention to something now. Are you on TikTok?
Yes, I will fully admit that, yes.
So 4 seconds, right? If I can't capture your attention in 4 seconds, then you can forget about the next 12 seconds. So, and then I have to tell you the whole story in 15 seconds or you'll be bored. So, like,
the hook is so much shorter now.
Well, and you just have less time. So, like, explain one thing clearly. So, like, I should be able to tell you what a commercial is about in 1 sentence when it's over, you know? So, I think people very easily lose sight of that because quite often companies are paying quite a lot of money all at once for something that to them feels very short, and they want to pack everything into it. And the thing is, generally, that makes it less effective. So
hope is not a plan.
Hope is not a plan.
But look at like
I'm still talking about it.
Yeah.
So that would be what I would say is like those are some straightforward storytelling tips that anybody can use telling any story about anything.
I'm the prime example of like the dinner party situation, like ADHD tangents that just bring you into the 4 different ones. And I could just feel Braden hitting me under the table, being like, back to the first, back to the first.
Yeah.
Come on.
Oh, it's tough.
And like, I need accountability on the outside. Like, that's not him being rude. I need someone to be like, bring it back, reel it in.
Well, I find I'm a huge comedy fan, and I
Yeah.
find that has really helped me kind of tighten up telling stories, because the thing is, if there isn't a punchline, it isn't a joke. So you have to think about telling a story that same way, where it's like, what am I building up to, and what do I leave people with? And then it's over. You know what I mean? And then you also have to leave it, because if it doesn't go over as well as you'd hoped,
Move on.
you move on. Don't
Yeah.
sit there and try and, dig your joke out of a shallow grave. That's no helpful either. So you
Totally.
finish it and move on.
And I love that you, not only are you my mentor when it comes to like film and photography, but also now you're my comedy Yoda.
I don't know about that.
Own it. I did stand up specifically because it was like, look, if this fails, if it bombs, I just want to know how to tell a good story and land a punchline, because you always notice at a dinner who are the ones who are like, oh, this person, you can guarantee when they come to a dinner party, and I'll never forget this episode of Bourdain. And you know exactly where I'm going with this?
I think so.
Okay. There's an episode where they go to Quebec and they're with, I believe it's 2 chefs. I wish I knew their name off the top of my head right now. And they discuss this, where they're like, if you're a guest at a dinner party, it is your responsibility to come prepared with good stories. Feel how you will about it. Of course, there's still like connections and many other reasons for dinner party. I love that.
I think you're going to have a better dinner party. I think that's maybe a strong
It's
ask.
a very strong, yeah.
Sometimes I just want to have a drink and hang out with my friends, but I mean, I don't disagree. I think
But have a few in your back pocket.
yeah, certainly. I mean, I try and as a person who travels quite a lot, I have a terrible fear of becoming the person who goes on and on about, well, the time I was over here in Budapest, and then I was over here doing this, and then that makes regale you with all the great stories of how awesome my life is all the time. You know what I mean? Like, I don't want to be that guy. At first, when I started traveling, I was that person because I was so excited, and I couldn't leave it. I'd come back and be like, oh my God, I've just done this. Let me tell you this. Let me tell you every single thing that happened. And now I'm like, I would hear myself and being like, oh my God, I'm exhausting. I am the person I would hate at dinner. So now generally I try and distill it down to, I'll think of one exceptional thing that happened and one summary of what I was doing. And so then when someone's like, hey, were you away? How was such and such? And I'll be like, it was great. I was here doing this. And if they say, oh, really? And they want to know more, then I'll tell them one story about one thing that happened, and then we leave it. Because otherwise I talk and talk and talk and talk. And I love the sound of my own voice, so that's a problem. I need to stop, or I'll just carry on and on.
I think that's really good advice generally, because sometimes it's the leave it wanting more effect, or if someone actually is interested in doubling down, they'll ask a follow-up question, but you're kind of giving someone the out and the opportunity if you are a talker.
Yes. And
because I have the same problem.
I don't want to go and do a PowerPoint presentation. I just want to have a drink and have a chat, I just want to hang out. I want to see my friends, and I want to know about their lives too. It's not any less interesting. People, I think the difference is my life can sound very glamorous even when it isn't necessarily, but that doesn't make it more interesting. I have friends that work in healthcare who have insane, unbelievable stories, the likes of which I'm never going to run into. And I think that stuff is fascinating. And is it glamorous? Not always. No. A lot of the time it's blood and guts and terror, but it's still fascinating. And I don't think there's any less value in that. And I have to structure the conversation so that they feel that way, because I don't want to sit and bulldoze them with this and that and the other thing.
First of all, I'd watch a PowerPoint presentation of any of your travels any day. But there's a time and a place where I love, there's this little, speaking of TikTok, a TikTok trend where people do this. And it's get everyone together and do a PowerPoint presentation. And mostly it's comedy based versus here's how amazing my trip was. But
that sounds like fun though.
Oh, it's amazing. It's amazing. And then imagine you did that. Look, ours is a little bit more serious of saying you have a friend in healthcare who's oh my God, you need to know about this. And where everyone has this area of expertise. But then some of these other ones are here's a PowerPoint presentation, which I also love and am on board with, of here are all the Tinder dates I went on in the past 3 months from your single friends. And I'm here for those as well.
I love that.
You have so many experiences across. I want to ask you about your time in Chernobyl, your time in Antarctica, and also the work in Giants of Africa, because it is incredibly important and how much that program has developed over the past. When was the first film?
It was 20 years ago. Well, the film was 2015, but the program is 20 years old.
That is incredible. You have such a vast wealth of experiences and areas of that you enjoy and can film, dare I ask the question, is there one in particular that you are most passionate about? And if you could do that category the rest of your life, what is it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean,
zero hesitation.
No,
I love that.
No, my dream is always had been to work underwater. That's always what I wanted to do. And I remember diving for the first time when I was 15 and being like, oh my God, this is amazing. But thinking it was kind of a thing you do on special occasions, you know, if you are lucky enough to go somewhere where that's possible. And it wasn't until I got a bit older and started meeting more folks where I was like, oh no, you can go diving here. You can go diving in Lake Ontario. You can go locally. And there are people who do this for a living. There are people who are dive masters and they're underwater welders and they work on fish farms. And more than that, like there are people who are filmmakers that's their life. And so I always wanted to do that. And I would do it. I would spend all my money on a underwater housing for a camera and then go and just shoot just because I loved it. And I was in love with the idea of being able to go and make these images underwater in a place where a lot of people don't ever get the chance to go, and try and bring that back and show. Because I was always, when I was watching Planet Earth or what have you when I was young, it was always the underwater stuff where I was like, that's so cool. Because I mean, most of us, you know, we live on the land. And the land is, have you heard of it? The land,
No.
yeah. We live in and around the land. So like when you see something like a forest, it's not super unfamiliar. Like it's not that it isn't amazing, but we've been in or near a forest. But underwater, it's like everything is so radically and unusually different, and animals live in 3 dimensions, and coral we treat like plants, but they're technically animals, and people are trying to change that terminology to marine animal forest rather than coral reef. But I was so fascinated by that. And the dream would be, of course, to work underwater. So when I did my big equipment purchase, it was in 2014, and I was like, I'm going to buy a proper camera with the goal of going freelance in a couple of years. It was while I was still working at the travel company, and I bought the camera and I bought the underwater housing to go with it. I spent more money than I'd ever spent in my life in one go. That took me years and years to pay off. And that way, my thinking was, when the call comes, I'd be like, yes, I have everything you need and I can go today. And so I would take this with me and I would shoot whatever I could, wherever I could, as often as I could. And when the call did eventually come, it was with Rolex that I got my first proper paid underwater gig.
That was your first paid
like I'd done odds and ends, or like I'd done stuff where, you know, there's 1 or 2 underwater shots here or there, or like a music video in a pool type of thing. But this was like natural history in the ocean in Chile, like on the other side of the world. And they had lost their cinematographer. I think it was like 2 weeks before. I don't remember what happened. He had a visa problem or he had a conflict or something like that. And by some bizarre miracle, their fixer, who was a Chilean guy who based out of Santiago, he was in a Toronto film Facebook group for like, I need a producer, fixer, etc. And I had just posted my new reel and it had a bunch of underwater stuff in it. And I was like, hey guys, if anyone needs an underwater person, blah, blah, blah. And he reached out and he said, hey, we've just lost our underwater guy. Can I put you in touch with our director? And he did. And 2 weeks later, I was going to Chile. So like, it did work out because I was, you know, you're putting your work out there, you're telling as many people as you can. And then when the time comes, you're not scrambling around trying to rent something, trying to learn how something works, trying to use equipment for the first time. I have the equipment, I know how it goes, and I can get it on a plane and go. And it was amazing. And then I had something proper to show after that. So I was really thrilled with that. And like now I've been doing a lot more ocean conservation type storytelling. I did a film about whale sharks in 2019 that was on my own, which was really fun and very difficult.
What's it called so people can watch?
It's called Galapagos, Secrets of the Ocean Giants. We're still working on trying to get a place where it can be viewed regularly, but it's been at a number of film festivals, and hopefully sooner or later it'll have a life on streaming. That's the dream. But I did that, which I was really, really excited about. And now that's all I want to do. At the moment, I do between 1 and 3 really cool underwater jobs a year. And I would love for it to be, you know, 50-50 underwater on the land. That would be the dream.
The land.
The land.
We're all the way back
You've heard
to
of the land. Yeah.
Yeah, I've heard of it. I'm not quite super familiar with it though. I mean, listening to this audiobook right now, but like of shipping your work, because there's not feeling confident. Like there's always more. There's always more you want to add. There's more on the reel. There's more of this. But like the importance of going, no, you update it every year, put it out there. It may not be the standard of where you're constantly going to be moving the goalpost, but you're not going to get jobs if you don't put it out there.
You update your reel every year?
I've heard you should.
I do
And that's like
I do every 3 years.
I'm the absolute hypocrite saying this advice. Like I keep saying I'm going to update my hosting reel. I'm like,
Right.
no, this
It's
shit in there
so
is
difficult.
pre-COVID.
You're already trying to do work projects and then your own projects. And then this isn't even like a project. It's just necessary. It's like updating your resume. If you're updating your resume, took hundreds of hours.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And then the importance of community. And how often do jobs are they still like in community groups on Facebook? Just good to know.
I don't know. I was a lot more active in it back then, and I feel like it was a lot more conducive to getting jobs back then. It's kind of swelled beyond its original size, and it's also a lot more for like local Toronto things now. But most of what I do is word of mouth these days, so it's not something I've participated in to the same degree, so I couldn't speak to its effectiveness now.
If you are open to talking about it and it's not something you're keeping close to the chest in the back pocket for an upcoming project, is there a story that you would love to capture? You get funding tomorrow, you can go shoot this, and it's related to ocean conservation. What would you pursue?
I mean, there's two things. One, I've never been diving in Antarctica, and that's a goal of mine. I would love to do something like that. There's so much interesting life there. And there's also a lot of really bizarre sort of anthropomorphological effects from old whaling stations where they've just been discarding whale bones into the bay for hundreds of years. And I feel like there's probably a lot of really beautiful and strange things to see. The way ice moves and how it interacts with the sea is really amazing. And that's something that, we affect it and it affects us. So I think there's a lot of really amazing stories to tell in the Antarctic, especially from a human impact point of view. I would love to do something like that. And the other thing I would love to do would be to pick up on the whale shark project and try and make it a global picture of the state of whale sharks in the world. Because the nice thing about all of this ocean conservation stuff is that the communities are very small. So if you meet somebody who does any kind of ocean conservation work, it's like 2 degrees of separation. So they'll know someone that you know, or the person they know knows them. And it happens more and more and more and more. So all the whale shark people know each other. And even when we were doing our project in the Galapagos, there were 5 people on the boat. One of them worked at the Georgia Aquarium where they keep whale sharks. He pioneered the techniques for how they were going to take blood from one in mid-water as they were swimming along. There were 2 people from a university in Okinawa who couldn't come, unfortunately, but they learned how to ultrasound a whale shark in mid-water to see if they could discover whether they were pregnant or where they were getting pregnant. There was another...
And why is that so important? We've talked about that offline. But
yeah,
that one...
well, I mean, that's a whole other thing. But
Okay.
Basically, like, we know nothing about the whale shark reproductive cycle. Short version. But there was another guy who he works out of New Zealand, and he has a project in Tofo in Mozambique and another one in Ningaloo Reef in Australia, where they look at different populations. The 2 of them had worked together on a project in St. Helena, which is this tiny island in the middle of the South Atlantic, where it's the only place that attempted mating has ever been witnessed, because no one has ever seen whale sharks mate, no one has ever seen whale sharks give birth, but an attempt at mating was caught on video in St. Helena once. It's the only evidence we have. So I would love to go to St. Helena, go to Ningaloo Reef, go to Tofo in Mozambique, go to Thailand, go to the Philippines, go to Mexico and talk about tourism with whale sharks and kind of create a global picture of what's going on with them, what's our impact, why they're important. They get talked about quite a lot as an ambassador species and why that's important for conservation. And to underscore the idea that you're never going to protect something that you don't care about. So you want to help people to love and to care about these things so that they will care enough to protect them.
Another how-to episode completely on its own when there are so many things to care about in the world.
Like, you can only really do 1 or 2.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I'm going to do that one because
exactly.
you can't save everybody.
But then how can film actually help drive and impact that? Like, people, you're torn in so many different areas depending on what's happening in like what your personal life is, where you live, on what causes you want to focus on. But how is film a conduit to empathy?
Well, it's like I was just saying, is if you get someone to care about something, then they'll want to protect it. Like, if nobody cares about the earth, then nobody's going to bother protecting it. Because why would you think about all the things you don't care about? Well, you're not donating money or time or effort to those causes, right? So like, film is the connective tissue that helps get people to care, because it might be something that I feel like we can all kind of get on board with the idea that generally human-introduced climate change is not great, but there's not a lot you can do with that information if you want an actionable step. So another thing that film can do is give you instructions so that when you finish a film and you're like, oh my God, this is a terrible disaster, this volcano or this oil spill or this, terrible fishing practice, what can I do to change this? If you're a filmmaker, tell people.
Right.
Tell them what to do. Give them actionable, tangible steps. Be like, go and donate your money to this particular cause because they're doing X, Y, and Z. Go and donate your time on these particular volunteer opportunities because they're going to make a genuine impact. Because every now and then, and they never get as much press, there are really successful conservation stories. So on the ship that I work on in the Antarctic, we would raise money on board in auctions for the South Georgia rat eradication program. It's not particularly glamorous, but basically South Georgia has the highest density of wildlife of any place on Earth. So you don't see 10 or 20 penguins, you see 200,000 penguins. And it's breeding ground for king penguins. It's a breeding ground for a number of different species of albatross and for a number of different species of definitely fur seals and I believe elephant seals as well. But when whalers first arrived on South Georgia, they would have these creaky old ships from, the 17, the 1800s, and the hold would be full of rats. And so the rats eventually got onto South Georgia, and the rats would predate on baby albatross and on albatross eggs because it was easy prey. And the albatross, who'd never had to deal with a land predator before, got torn to pieces, and the populations were decimated because it was such a unique niche, and we'd introduced a problem that they'd never had to deal with and had no defenses for. So we raised money over a period of, not just us, a lot of other people as well. But one of the guys who spearheaded the rat eradication program named Scobie Pye, he worked with us on board our ship.
Killer name.
You could do a whole episode on him. He's unbelievable. He's worked in the Antarctic for 50 years and he's overwintered on South Georgia twice. Anyway, we raised money for this program. And as of, I think it's 3 years ago, we did eradicate the rats. There are no rats on South Georgia. We finished the project. It stopped now, and the albatross population is starting to come back because we identified the problem. Experts figured out a way of dealing with the problem. People raised money in a meaningful way where you take them to South Georgia, you show them how amazing it is, and then you're like, your money in this box now will tangibly help save all of the animals you've spent today looking at and enjoying. And they did. So it's like, if you give people tangible steps like that and examples of how it can be successful and show them something to fall in love with, then they care about it, they have an actionable step, and they have faith that something good could be done.
I love that. And I know we're almost at time here. Is there an area that you're just sometimes not asked about that you wish people knew? I'm going to leave it as broad as that intentionally.
Boy.
I want to know where your brain goes with it.
I really don't know. I mean, I feel like I do get asked the same 5 or 6 questions over and over again, but I think that's normal. I think especially just the nature of the types of interviews that I end up doing.
And usually what are the 5 and 6?
How did you get to where you are? What's the hardest part of your job? What's the most interesting place that you've been? What's your next project? And that sort of thing. You know what I mean?
So all the ones I just hit. Great.
Oh, no. Well, you did a couple of them. And I mean, some of them are just necessary.
Yeah,
I don't begrudge you, but and I'm getting better at answering them, I think. But something that I don't get asked, I would love to be asked a more tangible logistics question. You know what I mean? Like when I had a really great conversation on the phone just recently where I met somebody when I was working in Rwanda, and they were like, hey, do you know so-and-so? He's an underwater photographer as well. He's on the West Coast. And I said, no. And they put us in touch. And I got on the phone just to make an introduction and get to know him a little bit. I thought we were going to talk for 15 minutes. We talked for 90 minutes. And because we, like I was mentioning before, had all the same problems. So we just kept going on. Oh my God, okay, it's this. How do you overcome this? Well, why do you think this is a good idea? So sometimes it's really great to get into the nuts and bolts of something because you talked a little bit about community earlier, and that's a really tricky thing in natural history because generally when you're in the field, you're often by yourself or you're with one other person who doesn't do the same job as you. So it's very difficult to build community. And on very rare occasions, sometimes you'll be on a shoot where there are 2 camera ops, or maybe there are a few more, and you actually have the same home base. And that's the best because you're sitting up close with the person in the field and with all of their equipment. And you can sit there and be like, well, how do you solve this problem when this happens? Or like when the sun is behind you and they're like, well, I built this, tiny little Velcro-based sun shield, but it folds flat so I can get it behind the thing in the Pelican case so it doesn't increase the weight of any packing. Or it's like, how do you manage to get all of your stuff through in the fewest number of cases? Or what do you do when you're trying to get this from one place to another? Or even with dive gear. Why, like, you'll see somebody suit up in the same, like, I'm getting into this rebreather situation now, and that's already niche. Diving is niche enough. It's hard enough to find a diver who cares enough to talk about the nuts and bolts of that with you. Now you're into rebreathers, so you need a rebreather diver who is, doing other work. They call it, task loading, because...
And can you explain what a rebreather diver is, actually, before you go into task loading?
In very, very brief steps, regular scuba diving is called open circuit. So you breathe in from a tank, out into the water. Rebreather diving is called closed circuit. So you breathe out from a tank and then back into the tube, and then you breathe that breath a second time, and a carbon scrubber on your back scrubs the carbon dioxide out of your breathing loop so that you can utilize the unused oxygen the second time around.
And the main purpose of that is for...
You can
bubbles?
stay longer. Well, you can stay longer underwater. You can mix your gases in real time, so you have less deco time, and you don't blow bubbles, so you're less likely to frighten wildlife. And there are a number of other smaller advantages, like it's not cold and dry in your mouth; it's warm, and that's much more comfortable. And if you're getting into more technical or more mixed gas diving, you're not carrying 500 bottles with you like some tech divers have to. You can mix a lot of it on your back, and you're only carrying bailout.
Okay.
Anyway, task loading is where you are giving yourself more jobs in an already difficult situation. So astronauts deal with this, divers deal with this. Anybody who is doing a task in an extreme environment where task number one is remain alive.
Right.
So on your rebreather, you're constantly monitoring your PO2, which is your partial pressure of oxygen in your breathing loop, to make sure not only that you have enough, but that you don't have too much, because there are a lot of fun and exciting new ways to die when you get into rebreather diving. So that's one task. Then you have
says
to...
with the biggest smile on his face. Okay.
Then you have to do the dive. So you're moving from one place to another. You're like locating, the animal in question, or maybe you're doing something sciencey, like changing an acoustic receiver. So you have to go to there, and then you have to remove the acoustic receiver and then tie on the new one. So that's a second task that goes on top of the previous task. And then I'm trying to film these things. So I'm also trying to make decisions about my camera. So I'm selecting my aperture, and I'm pulling focus, and I'm pressing record and stopping record and making sure I have enough battery and doing all of these other things without forgetting
To not die?
to not die. So task loading can be really, really tricky. I can't remember why I started talking about this.
Is the sense of community and having people to be able to talk to.
Yes, that's right. So it's that everyone has advice if they do this enough. They'll have shortcuts. They'll have little ways they've set things up. One of the great ones that I saw was Guylain, who is an amazing technical rebreather diver out of France. He works with an organization called Under the Pole that him and his wife co-founded. He does a lot of filming as well, and it's tough for him because he's one of the only people on board who can do the filming, but he has 10 other tasks. He's the expedition leader, he's doing deep experimental dives, he's collecting science experiments, and he's deciding where the ship is going to sail the next day. So he's got so much going on. So it was really great when I got to work with him, because in some cases I could sort of take on the filming stuff for some of the shallower dives, but he has his camera set up, and I got my camera set up, and we would sit there and discuss constantly. One of the things that he did is so simple, but he has, generally you always have redundancy, because 2 is 1 and 1 is none, as they say. So he would have a second. Yeah, it's just good advice in general if you deal with equipment of any kind. But he would have a second dive computer, as you always do. Normally I have my primary on my left wrist and then my secondary on my right wrist. He has his secondary on his camera under his monitor. So he doesn't even have to move his hand to be able to see what's going on. And I was like, that's such a simple thing and makes so much sense. And it immediately, it saves you time. It saves you tasks. It makes you a little bit safer. And it was just one of those things where it's like, I never would have thought to do that on my own. And it's not until you start talking to these people and you find these things out. And of the same token, he was struggling because he'd had these presets, but he couldn't get the presets to change the shutter speed. And I was like, well, just set it at 180 degrees shutter, so that way the shutter speed is going to be relative to your frame rate all the time. This is what I mean about asking me super technical questions. And we both sorted out the presets, and so I had taught him something and he had taught me something. And we both had a much better dive the next time. And I'm like, this would be a great thing to be asked. You know what I mean? But it's tough. It's tough to do something that's relevant to a broader audience. Like it's so what I do is already so niche. I've made it more niche by putting it underwater. So it's like the people that I would be saying this to mostly know already, and most of them know more than me because I'm sort of just getting into it. But it is fun. It's like when you see two car people get together and start talking, you know? You know how immediately the conversation.
It could be car, it could be anime, it could be like whenever two people care about a niche, and it's like, one of us.
Right, but if it's inevitably, it's like numbers that are getting thrown around. There's a whole language that you don't understand, and all of a sudden, it's like, I had this experience. I was in Tampa, and my friend, I didn't know this, but is an enormous American football fan. And our server, the draft was on the TV, and our server came over and he just made an offhand comment to the server, and boom, they were off on a 16-minute conversation about American football. And I was like, I didn't know you could do that. It was like seeing a different person. It was really, really amazing. So that's the blessing and the curse of it. Like, I would love to have more conversations like that, but it's for 20 people.
But I love what I'm taking away from it is all the way back to the beginning of this conversation saying, check your got the door. Ask questions and reach out. The intimidation factor, sometimes you don't reach out because it's like, oh, like, are they competition? They're a lot further ahead in their career than me, perceptively. And then going, no, just, you know what, everyone, we all have something to learn from each other. Feel okay to reach out. And to reach out is also to check your ego. I mean, like, I want to know what I know and I want to know what I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, what's the worst thing that can happen? They're going to be like, no.
Exactly.
You're no worse off.
Also, I don't have time. Okay, great. Is there time in the future or are you not interested?
Yeah.
No problem.
Fine. Mm-hmm.
And to give someone the out too, because like sometimes life is crazy where it's like, hey, I'd love to reach out, and like don't get offended if someone's like, I can't right now.
Right. Yeah.
Like
I would love to talk to everybody all the time, but I also can't. I mean, I'm about to go to 6 weeks where I'll have no internet. And so no offense to anyone. I just can't do it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
How dare.
Yeah, I know.
Need to be focused and not die.
Yeah, I know. How dare I?
Well, definitely having you back on for another episode. Maybe we get more technical. Maybe it's a super niche episode. But thank you so much for coming on, Mr. Jeff Garriott.
Thank you so much for having me. It's always exciting to talk and talk and talk and talk. And hopefully I didn't go on and on too much.
Not at all, because again, both of us can. And now, on to the smooth jazz.
And thanks for listening to KLN 95. And coming up next, it's Miles Davis.
Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. If you wanted to follow along with Jeff's journey or have some just beautiful images and videos come across your timeline, be sure to follow him at Jeffrey Garriock, Jeffrey, Garriock, Garriock. Also, I encourage you to check out his IMDb page for the work that he's been a part of. That includes 2 beautiful shorts that he was cinematographer on, Children of Chernobyl, and also Galapagos, Secrets of the Ocean Giants. Thank you so much again for listening. And if you could spare a moment, please leave a comment, leave a review on this podcast, wherever it is that you're listening. The little bit of love goes a long way. And if you have a how-to episode that you would like to have us explore on this show, please don't hesitate to reach out to our team.